The weight of the tactical assessment tablet felt heavier in Commander Alexandra Reeves' hands than the controls of an F-35 ever had. At 0600 hours, Westwind Joint Air Base vibrated with the familiar cadence of another day, jets screaming overhead, ground crews shouting instructions, and the mechanical symphony of military precision unfolding like clockwork. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But Alexandra moved through it all like a ghost, invisible to the pilots who rushed past her toward their morning briefings. 3 years ago, she had been one of them. 3 years ago, her callsign Phoenix had been spoken with reverence in fighter squadrons across 2 continents. Now, at 36, she was officially nobody, a strategic assessment officer with security clearance barely high enough to evaluate the aircraft she once flew better than anyone else in the Air Force. The morning review of the experimental Raptor X stealth fighter should have been routine. Alexandra ran her analytical software over the aircraft's performance data, checking for anomalies with the methodical precision that had kept her alive through countless combat missions. Her trained eye found every inconsistency, every performance variance, every potential failure point with an intimacy that came from understanding these machines at a molecular level. Still playing with numbers, Reeves? The voice belonged to Major Gabriel Thompson, the current lead test pilot for the Raptor X program. He stood in his flight suit, helmet tucked under his arm, radiating the casual arrogance of someone who'd never faced real consequences for his mistakes. Behind him, Captain Lucas Bennett snickered like a schoolyard bully. Alexandra didn't look up from her tablet. "Just ensuring your aircraft won't fall out of the sky, sir." "My aircraft," Thompson repeated, letting the possessive hang in the air. Funny how things work out, isn't it? One little mistake, and suddenly the great Alexandra Reeves is checking my flight logs. The little mistake had cost the military a $190 million prototype and nearly cost Alexandra her life. A targeting system failure during a classified weapons test had sent her experimental aircraft into an uncontrolled spin. She'd managed to regain control at the last possible second, but the damaged aircraft had still crashed, scattering months of cutting-edge engineering across the Arizona desert. The investigation had been swift and decisive. Despite clear evidence of system malfunction, evidence Alexandra had provided in excruciating technical detail, someone needed to be held responsible. The program was too important, the stakes too high, and the political pressure too intense for the truth to matter more than convenience. Alexandra Reeves, once trusted with aircraft that officially didn't exist, was stripped of her flight status and reassigned to tactical assessment duties pending review. The review, she'd been assured, was just a formality. That was 36 months ago. "Is there something specific you need, Major?" Alexandra asked, finally meeting Thompson's eyes. "Actually, yeah. Make sure you triple-check the weapons targeting integration. I'd hate for any irregularities to show up during today's test." His smile was razor-thin. "You understand how important accuracy is in assessment reports." The threat was clear. Alexandra's tactical assessments were scrutinized with an intensity that bordered on harassment. One questionable judgment call, one missed detail, one minor oversight would give them the excuse they needed to remove her from the base entirely. She nodded once, professionally, and watched Thompson swagger away. As the morning progressed, Alexandra completed her assessments with robotic efficiency. She knew these aircraft better than their designers. She'd helped develop half the systems currently in testing. Her technical knowledge was encyclopedic, her attention to detail flawless, but none of that mattered anymore. During her lunch break, she sat alone in the assessment office reviewing technical manuals for aircraft she'd never fly again. The solitude was broken by Master Sergeant Olivia Ramirez, a 22-year veteran who'd been at Westwind since before Alexandra's arrival. "You know," Ramirez said, settling into the chair across from her, "I've been watching you work for 3 years now. Never seen tactical assessments so thorough they could qualify as doctoral theses." Alexandra looked up from her manual. Ramirez was one of the few people on base who still treated her like a human being, rather than a cautionary tale. "Just trying to do the job right, Sergeant. The job you're doing could be handled by a second-year academy graduate," Ramirez said quietly. "Oh, my niece could do basic flight assessments. But what you're doing, The kind of analysis you put in those reports, that's test pilot level insight. Used to be, Alexandra corrected. Is, Ramirez said firmly. You think those flyboys understand half of what you catch in your assessment notes? Thompson couldn't tell a targeting array misalignment from a coffee stirrer, but he's up there flying birds that you know better than he knows his own reflection. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Alexandra closed the manual and leaned back in her chair. Doesn't matter what I know, Olivia. What matters is what the file says. Files can change. Not mine. Ramirez was quiet for a moment, studying her with the expression of someone who'd seen too many good people broken by institutional politics. You ever wonder why they keep you here? Why they don't just transfer you to some desk job in Colorado Springs? Alexandra had wondered. A tactical assessment position at Westwind was hardly punishment duty. This was where the Air Force tested its most advanced aircraft. Someone with her background could have been shipped off to routine logistics work anywhere in the world. Maybe they're hoping I'll get frustrated and resign, she said. Or maybe, Ramirez said, standing to leave, maybe they know something they're not ready to admit yet. That afternoon, Alexandra watched through the command center windows as Thompson took the Raptor X through its paces. The aircraft was beautiful in flight. All sharp angles and impossible curves. Moving through the sky like physics was just a polite suggestion. She knew every system on that plane, had helped design half the testing protocols Thompson was executing. But she also knew something else, something that nagged at her as she watched the sleek fighter slice through the afternoon sky. The Raptor X program was in trouble. Not the kind of trouble that showed up in official reports, but the subtle, persistent problems that experienced test pilots felt in their bones. 3 minor incidents in the past month. Targeting glitches that appeared and disappeared without explanation. Flight control variations that fell within acceptable parameters but followed no logical pattern. Nothing dramatic enough to ground the program, but concerning enough to keep Alexandra awake at night. She'd mentioned her concerns in her assessment reports, couched in careful technical language that couldn't be dismissed as pilot ego or frustrated ambition. But her insights were filtered through a chain of command that had already decided she was unsuitable for operational input. As the Raptor X touched down and taxied toward the hangar, Alexandra gathered her equipment and prepared for the post-flight assessment. Tomorrow would bring another day of routine evaluations, another day of watching other people fly the aircraft she understood better than anyone else on the base. But tonight, as she locked up the assessment office and walked across the darkening tarmac, Alexandra Reeves carried a secret that would soon change everything at Westwind Joint Air Base. She'd been analyzing the Raptor X program's performance data for months, and she'd identified a pattern that no one else had noticed. The aircraft wasn't just having minor technical issues. It was building toward a catastrophic system failure that would kill whoever was flying it when the pattern reached its inevitable conclusion. And according to her calculations, that moment was less than a week away. The emergency alarm shattered the pre-dawn silence at Westwind Joint Air Base, its wailing cry cutting through Alexandra Reeves's uneasy sleep like a knife. She was dressed and running toward the command center before her conscious mind fully processed what the alarm meant. Aircraft down. Pilot status unknown. Emergency response protocol in effect. The scene that greeted her was controlled chaos. Emergency vehicles surrounded the twisted remains of what had been a Raptor X stealth fighter 12 hours earlier. The aircraft had crashed during a routine night training exercise, punching a crater into the desert floor 3 miles from the runway. Major Gabriel Thompson had ejected successfully, but barely. His parachute had deployed less than 600 feet from impact. Alexandra stood at the edge of the command center, watching the live feed from the crash site while her mind cataloged every twisted piece of metal. The wreckage told a story that made her stomach clench with a mixture of vindication and horror. This wasn't pilot error or random mechanical failure. This was exactly what she'd been predicting in her assessment reports for the past 3 months. Reeves, Colonel James Harrison, the base commander, strode toward her with the expression of a man looking for someone to blame. "You were the last person to assess that aircraft. I want your report on my desk in 1 hour." "Yes, sir," Alexandra replied, but her attention remained fixed on a particular piece of debris, a section of the targeting computer housing that showed clear signs of the cascading electrical failures she'd been documenting. The next few hours passed in a blur of interviews, technical reports, and the kind of institutional finger-pointing that followed any aircraft loss. Alexandra provided her assessment with clinical precision, detailing every system check she'd performed and every anomaly she'd noted in her assessment logs. What she didn't mention was the analysis she'd been conducting in her own time, using performance data to build a comprehensive picture of the Raptor X program's systemic problems. That information lived in encrypted files on her personal laptop, evidence of insights that, officially, she wasn't qualified to provide. By noon, the preliminary investigation findings were circulating through the base's officer community. Pilot error was the early frontrunner for official cause. Thompson had been pushing the aircraft through aggressive maneuvers that exceeded recommended parameters. The crash was being framed as the inevitable result of reckless flying rather than fundamental design flaws. Alexandra was reviewing system logs in the assessment office when Master Sergeant Ramirez appeared in her doorway, her expression grim. "Conference room D, 10 minutes, she said quietly. "Bring everything." "Everything?" "Your laptop, your personal files, anything related to Raptor X performance analysis." Ramirez glanced over her shoulder, then stepped closer. "There are people who need to see what you've been working on." Alexandra's pulse quickened. Her unofficial analysis was thorough enough to constitute insubordination if discovered by the wrong people. But if Ramirez was right, if someone was finally ready to listen to her technical concerns rather than dismiss them based on her personnel file, this might be her chance to prevent more crashes. Conference Room D was normally used for routine briefings, but today it held an unusual assembly. Colonel Harrison sat at the head of the table, flanked by two civilians Alexandra didn't recognize, investigators from the Pentagon based on their bearing and expensive suits. Captain Eliza Winters, the Raptor X program's chief engineer, occupied a chair along the wall, her laptop open and files spread across the table. "Commander Reeves," Colonel Harrison began formally, "these gentlemen are investigating systemic issues with the Raptor X program. They've requested access to all assessment data from the past 6 months, including any personal observations or analysis you may have conducted." Alexandra set her laptop on the table, acutely aware that the next few minutes would either vindicate 3 years of careful observation or end her military career entirely. "Sir, I've been tracking performance anomalies across multiple aircraft for several months. The patterns suggest—" "We'll determine what the patterns suggest," interrupted one of the civilians. A thin man with steel-gray hair and the demeanor of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "What we need from you is raw data, not interpretation." For the next hour, Alexandra walked them through her analysis. Targeting system irregularities that appeared random but followed a predictable sequence when viewed across multiple flights. Flight control variations that suggested software conflicts between primary and backup systems. Electrical anomalies that occurred precisely when aircraft reached specific combinations of altitude, speed, and system load. "This level of analysis," Winters said finally, "goes far beyond standard assessment protocols. Where did you acquire the expertise to conduct this kind of systems integration review?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Alexandra was officially a tactical assessment officer with basic technical training. The analysis she presented required advanced engineering knowledge and test pilot experience that her current position didn't acknowledge. "I observe patterns, ma'am. When you work with the same aircraft daily for 3 years, you notice things." The gray-haired civilian leaned forward. "Commander Reeves, your assessment reports show exceptional attention to detail, but this analysis suggests knowledge of flight systems at a level typically associated with test pilot training. Help us understand how an assessment officer developed this expertise." Alexandra felt the familiar weight of institutional suspicion settling over the room. These people needed her knowledge, but they couldn't reconcile her insights with their preconceptions about her current role. The truth, that she understood these aircraft better than anyone else on the base because she'd helped develop them, was too politically inconvenient to acknowledge. "I study technical manuals in my spare time, sir. I ask questions. I pay attention." Colonel Harrison's expression suggested he found this explanation as unsatisfying as the investigators did. But before he could respond, Ramirez knocked on the conference room door. "Sir, we have another situation." Lieutenant Walker's Raptor X just experienced a complete targeting system failure during final approach. He managed an emergency landing, but the system crashed exactly as Commander Reeves predicted in her analysis. The room fell silent. Alexandra's projection models had indicated that the next critical failure would occur within 72 hours of Thompson's crash, affecting whichever Raptor X aircraft accumulated the specific combination of flight hours and system stress she'd identified as the trigger point. Lieutenant Walker's aircraft had fit that profile perfectly. "Commander Reeves," the gray-haired civilian said slowly, "we need to discuss your analysis in much greater detail, and we need to discuss it now." Alexandra opened her laptop and began explaining how she'd identified the pattern that was systematically destroying the most advanced fighter aircraft in the American military. What she didn't explain was how she knew these systems so intimately, or why her technical knowledge exceeded what her current position should have provided. But as the afternoon wore on, and as her predictions proved accurate with disturbing precision, Alexandra began to understand that her exile might be ending. The Raptor X program was in crisis, and she was the only person who understood why. The question was whether institutional pride would allow them to admit they needed her expertise, or whether they'd find another way to explain away the knowledge she wasn't supposed to possess. Outside the conference room windows, another Raptor X sat on the tarmac, its sleek lines hiding the fatal flaw that Alexandra had identified months ago. Tomorrow, that aircraft was scheduled for Captain Lucas Bennett's certification flight, the test that would qualify him as a Raptor X program instructor pilot. Based on her analysis, that flight would be Lieutenant Walker's aircraft's twin in terms of accumulated stress factors. Without immediate intervention, Lucas Bennett would be flying a time bomb that was scheduled to explode somewhere over the Arizona desert. Alexandra closed her laptop and looked directly at Colonel Harrison. "Sir, I need to show you something else. Something about tomorrow's flight schedule." The tension in the room was palpable. For 3 years, Alexandra Reeves had been systematically ignored, her expertise dismissed as the bitter musings of a disgraced pilot. Now, as the evidence of her technical acumen became impossible to ignore, the institutional walls that had confined her were beginning to crack. "Proceed, Commander," Colonel Harrison said, his voice tight with the strain of someone confronting an uncomfortable truth. Alexandra pulled up her analysis of Captain Bennett's scheduled aircraft. The data visualization showed a clear progression of system anomalies that mirrored the pattern preceding Thompson's crash. "Sir, Captain Bennett's Raptor X shows all the indicators of imminent targeting system failure. Based on accumulated flight hours, stress patterns, and system response variations, I project a 78% probability of catastrophic failure during tomorrow's certification flight." The second civilian, a woman with short silver hair and piercing blue eyes, studied the data with the intensity of someone who understood its implications. "Your confidence in this projection seems extraordinarily high, Commander. Because the pattern is extraordinarily consistent, ma'am. These aren't random failures. They're systematic design flaws manifesting under specific operational conditions." Captain Winters, the program engineer, looked skeptical. "Our design team has reviewed all system interactions exhaustively. What you're suggesting would have been identified during development testing." Alexandra kept her expression neutral, though the irony of Winters' statement wasn't lost on her. She'd been part of that development team before her reassignment. "With respect, Captain, these interactions only become apparent when the aircraft accumulates specific combinations of operational stress that weren't replicated in controlled testing environments." The gray-haired civilian, who had finally introduced himself as Dr. Marshall from the Pentagon's Advanced Systems Safety Division, tapped his fingers thoughtfully on the conference table. "Commander Reeves, your projections have already proven accurate twice. We can't ignore the possibility that Captain Bennett's aircraft represents a similar risk. I'm recommending immediate grounding of all Raptor X aircraft pending comprehensive system review." Colonel Harrison looked as though he'd swallowed something unpleasant. Grounding an entire fleet of experimental fighters would send shockwaves through the command structure and raise uncomfortable questions about how these problems had escaped detection for so long. "Dr. Marshall, grounding the fleet requires authorization from someone with the authority to determine that these aircraft represent an immediate safety risk," Dr. Marshall interrupted. "I have that authority, and based on Commander Reeves' analysis, I'm exercising it. Effective immediately, all Raptor X aircraft are grounded pending system review." The conference room door opened, and Captain Bennett entered, his expression shifting from confidence to confusion as he registered the tension in the room. "Sir, I was told you wanted to see me." Colonel Harrison nodded grimly. "Captain Bennett, your certification flight tomorrow has been canceled. All Raptor X operations are temporarily suspended." Bennett's face flushed with anger. "Sir, with respect, I've been preparing for this certification for months. What's the justification for sudden suspension?" Dr. Marshall gestured toward Alexandra's laptop. "Commander Reeves has identified a pattern of system failures that suggests your aircraft may be at risk for the same type of crash that claimed Major Thompson's Raptor X." Bennett's eyes narrowed as he focused on Alexandra. "You're grounding the entire program based on the analysis of an assessment officer who washed out of flight training?" "I didn't wash out," Alexandra said quietly. "I was reassigned following an aircraft failure investigation." "Following a crash you caused," Bennett retorted. "Everyone knows what happened during your test flight. You panicked, lost control, and destroyed a multi-million-dollar prototype." Alexandra stood slowly, her professional demeanor finally cracking after 3 years of similar accusations. "Captain, I didn't panic. I identified a targeting system failure, attempted emergency procedures, and managed to control an aircraft that, by all engineering standards, should have been uncontrollable." The investigation findings said pilot error was the primary factor, Bennett interrupted. "The investigation findings," Colonel Harrison said sharply, "are classified and not subject to discussion in this forum." He looked directly at Bennett. "Captain, you're dismissed. Report to the assessment center at 0800 for debriefing." Bennett hesitated, clearly wanting to continue the argument, but military discipline overrode personal animosity. He saluted stiffly and left the conference room, but not before shooting Alexandra a look that promised this confrontation was far from over. Dr. Marshall waited until the door closed before speaking again. "Commander Reeves, we're implementing your recommendations. All Raptor X aircraft will undergo comprehensive system analysis before any flight operations resume, but we need more than technical assessment. We need to understand how you developed this level of systems knowledge." Alexandra looked around the room at faces that mixed professional respect with personal suspicion. These people valued her insights, but questioned her authority to provide them. They needed her expertise, but couldn't acknowledge the experience that made it possible. "Dr. Marshall, I've been studying these aircraft for 3 years. When you're responsible for ensuring pilot safety through tactical assessment, you develop a comprehensive understanding of system integration and failure modes." "Or," said Captain Winters, her voice carefully neutral, "you already possessed that understanding before your reassignment to assessment duties." The statement was measured, but Alexandra heard the question behind it. Winters had been reviewing personnel files, trying to understand how an assessment officer had developed test pilot-level technical knowledge. "Captain Winters, are you suggesting my background includes experience beyond my current assignment?" "I'm suggesting that your analysis demonstrates expertise typically associated with advanced flight training and systems development work." Alexandra felt the conversation approaching dangerous territory. Acknowledging her previous role would require opening classified files and admitting that the investigation that ended her career had been politically motivated rather than technically justified. "My expertise comes from careful observation and systematic analysis," she said. Dr. Marshall consulted his notes. "Commander, we're recommending that you be assigned as technical consultant to the Raptor X investigation team. Your insights have already prevented potential casualties." "Sir, I'm not qualified for consultant positions. I'm assessment personnel." "You're qualified by results," Dr. Marshall replied. "Your analysis is saving lives." Colonel Harrison leaned forward. "Commander Reeves, I'm authorizing temporary assignment modification. You'll work directly with the investigation team while maintaining your regular duties." Alexandra nodded, understanding that she was being offered a chance to use her knowledge without officially acknowledging where that knowledge came from. It was a compromise that protected everyone's career while potentially solving the Raptor X program's problems. "Sir, I'll need access to complete flight data and maintenance records for all Raptor X aircraft." "Granted. And I'll need authorization to recommend flight restrictions based on aircraft-specific risk assessment." Colonel Harrison hesitated. Giving an assessment officer authority to ground certified pilots would raise questions throughout the command structure. "Within reason," he said finally. As the briefing concluded, Alexandra gathered her files with the satisfaction of someone whose warnings had finally been heard. but satisfaction was tempered by awareness that Lucas Bennett still considered her an enemy rather than an ally. Tomorrow's aircraft inspection would either vindicate her analysis or provide him with ammunition to challenge her credibility. Master Sergeant Ramirez was waiting in the corridor when she left the briefing room. "How'd it go?" she asked. "They're listening," Alexandra replied. "Finally." "And Bennett?" Alexandra considered the question. Lucas Bennett was skilled, ambitious, and convinced that she represented a threat to his career advancement. His aircraft showed clear indicators of impending system failure, but grounding him would confirm his suspicion that she was deliberately undermining Raptor X operations. "He's not happy," she said finally. "Honey, happiness isn't the objective here," Ramirez replied. "Keeping pilots alive is the objective. You just remember that when the politics get complicated." Alexandra nodded. But as she walked toward the assessment center, she wondered if preventing technical failures would be easier than managing the human conflicts her success was creating. Lucas Bennett wasn't just another pilot. He was Colonel Harrison's protege, and his career advancement depended on completing tomorrow's certification flight. The aircraft she'd flagged for comprehensive inspection was parked in Hangar 7, its sleek profile hiding the electronic time bomb she'd identified through months of careful analysis. Tomorrow would determine whether institutional politics could override technical reality, or whether her expertise would finally be acknowledged as legitimate. Either way, she intended to make sure no one died, because pride mattered more than facts. At 0600 hours the next morning, Alexandra Reeves stood beside Captain Lucas Bennett's Raptor X in Hangar 7. Surrounded by a team of engineers who were about to discover whether her analysis could prevent another crash. The aircraft looked perfect, all sharp angles and advanced composites representing billions of dollars in military technology. But Alexandra knew better. Dr. Catherine Evans, who had joined Dr. Marshall's investigation team overnight, approached with a tablet displaying test protocols. "Commander Reeves, walk us through your specific concerns about this aircraft." Alexandra moved to the Raptor X's targeting console, her hands finding system access panels with the familiarity of someone who'd helped design them. The primary issue is in the integration between targeting and flight control systems. Under specific stress conditions, the backup systems don't properly synchronize with primary controls. "What kind of stress conditions?" asked Captain Winters. Alexandra pulled up her analysis on a portable computer. "High altitude, maximum velocity with specific targeting sequence activations. The combination creates a feedback loop that the backup systems interpret as primary system failure." "So the backup systems shut down the primary systems," Dr. Evans said. "Worse, they fight each other for control while the pilot believes everything is functioning normally." Master Technical Sergeant Donovan, the lead maintenance specialist, began running the diagnostic sequence Alexandra had recommended. Within minutes, the aircraft's internal systems were displaying error codes that standard pre-flight checks had missed. "Jesus," Donovan muttered, staring at his diagnostic computer. "Commander Reeves, how did you know these faults were here?" Alexandra studied the error display, noting the specific combination of failures she'd predicted. Targeting processor conflicts, backup system synchronization errors, and flight control integration problems. Exactly the pattern that had destroyed 2 Raptor X aircraft in the past week. Pattern analysis, Sergeant. When you track performance data across multiple aircraft, failure indicators become predictable. Captain Bennett arrived as the diagnostic tests entered their second hour. He was dressed for flight, helmet under his arm, radiating the confidence of someone whose certification depended on completing today's mission. "What's the status?" he demanded. Dr. Evans consulted her tablet. "Captain, we've identified multiple system integration problems with your aircraft. Commander Reeves' analysis was accurate. This bird would have failed during your certification flight." Bennett's expression shifted from confidence to suspicion. "How convenient." The assessment officer finds problems that 3 teams of certified engineers missed during pre-flight inspection. "Captain Bennett," Alexandra said quietly, "these aren't maintenance issues. They're design integration problems that only appear under specific operational conditions. Conditions you happen to understand better than Raptor X program engineers." Alexandra felt the familiar weight of institutional skepticism, but this time she had data to support her position. "Captain, would you like to see the diagnostic results?" Bennett approached the test station where Sergeant Donovan was documenting system failures. The error log showed exactly what Alexandra had predicted, targeting conflicts that would have caused complete flight control failure at approximately 28,000 feet. "These could be false readings," Bennett said, but his voice carried less conviction. Dr. Evans looked up from her own analysis. "Captain, we've confirmed these failures on 2 separate diagnostic systems. Commander Reeves' assessment is technically sound." Bennett turned to face Alexandra directly. "You're telling me that you, working alone, identified problems that our entire engineering team missed. I'm telling you that pattern analysis over extended time periods reveals failure modes that single aircraft inspections don't catch. Pattern analysis that just happens to ground me on my certification day." The accusation hung in the air until Colonel Harrison entered the hangar, trailed by 2 more Pentagon investigators. His expression suggested he'd been briefed on the diagnostic results. "Status report," he ordered. Dr. Evans stood at attention. "Sir, Commander Reeves' analysis was correct. Captain Bennett's aircraft shows multiple system failures that would have resulted in flight emergency or crash." Colonel Harrison studied the diagnostic readouts, his face showing the expression of someone whose worst fears were being confirmed. "How many other Raptor X aircraft show similar problems?" Alexandra consulted her laptop. "Sir, based on flight hours and system stress indicators, approximately 65% of active aircraft require immediate inspection." 65%? Bennett's voice cracked slightly. "You're recommending we ground the entire Raptor X program." "I'm recommending we fix the problems before more pilots get killed," Alexandra replied. Colonel Harrison was quiet for several minutes, processing the implications. Grounding the Raptor X program would cost millions of dollars and months of development time. But continued operations with aircraft that showed systematic failure patterns would inevitably result in pilot casualties. "Commander Reeves," he said finally, "I'm assigning you as lead technical consultant for Raptor X program safety review. You'll work with Dr. Evans' team to identify and correct these system integration problems." Bennett stepped forward. "Sir, with respect, Commander Reeves is assessment personnel. This level of technical responsibility requires qualified engineering staff." "Captain Bennett," Colonel Harrison replied sharply, "Commander Reeves' analysis has already prevented at least 1 crash and possibly saved your life. Her qualifications appear to be adequate for the task." Alexandra felt a surge of vindication mixed with apprehension. She was being offered the chance to use her expertise legitimately, but accepting the assignment would expose her to even more scrutiny about her technical background. "Sir, I'll need access to complete Raptor X development files and original design specifications." "Granted." "And authority to recommend operational restrictions based on aircraft-specific risk assessment." Colonel Harrison hesitated again. Giving an assessment officer authority over flight operations would raise questions throughout the command structure, but continued crashes would raise worse questions. Within the scope of safety concerns, yes. Dr. Evans looked up from her tablet. "James, we're also recommending that Commander Reeves receive temporary upgrade and security clearance. This investigation will require access to classified development data." "Approved." Bennett watched this exchange with growing frustration. "Sir, I request transfer to another program. If Raptor X is going to be managed by assessment personnel, I'd prefer assignment elsewhere." "Request denied, Captain. You're staying with Raptor X, and you're going to work with Commander Reeves to identify and solve these problems." Bennett's jaw tightened, but military discipline prevented further argument. "Yes, sir." As the meeting concluded, Alexandra gathered her files with the satisfaction of someone whose expertise was finally being acknowledged. But satisfaction was tempered by awareness that Lucas Bennett now considered her a direct threat to his career advancement. Master Sergeant Ramirez approached as the hangar cleared. "Congratulations, Commander. Looks like you're back in the game." "Thanks, Olivia. But the real work starts now." "What do you mean?" Alexandra looked at the Raptor X aircraft that surrounded them, sleek, deadly, and systematically flawed in ways that their designers hadn't anticipated. "I mean, we have to fix these problems without admitting how I know they exist." Ramirez nodded slowly. "The political part." "The political part," Alexandra confirmed. "Lucas Bennett isn't going to make this easy." Honey, Lucas Bennett is the least of your problems. Wait until Pentagon budget people find out their $40 billion fighter program needs major redesign work. Alexandra considered this. Her analysis would eventually require acknowledgement that the Raptor X program had fundamental design flaws that couldn't be fixed with minor modifications. The aircraft would need extensive rework, months of additional testing, and significant budget increases, all based on recommendations from an assessment officer who officially wasn't qualified to make such assessments. Olivia, she said quietly, I think I'm going to need all the friends I can get. Ramirez smiled grimly. Commander, you've got more friends than you know. Every pilot on this base owes you their life, whether they admit it or not. As Alexandra walked toward her temporary office in the investigation building, she carried the Raptor X development files that would finally allow her to prove what she'd suspected for months. The aircraft weren't just experiencing random failures. They were victims of a systematic design flaw that made them inherently unstable under specific operational conditions. Fixing the problem would require acknowledging that she understood these systems better than anyone else on the base. And acknowledging that would inevitably lead to questions about how an assessment officer had acquired test pilot-level expertise, questions that would force her to relive the investigation that had ended her flying career 3 years ago. The classified Raptor X development files filled Alexandra Reeves' temporary office-like evidence in a trial where she was simultaneously the prosecutor, witness, and defendant. For 3 days, she'd been analyzing design specifications, test flight data, and engineering reports that painted a picture of institutional negligence stretching back to the program's inception. Dr. Catherine Evans knocked on the office door at 0800 hours, carrying coffee and the expression of someone who'd spent the night reviewing technical data. Commander Reeves, we need to discuss your findings. Alexandra looked up from a computer screen displaying Raptor X flight control software architecture. The code was elegant and sophisticated, but it contained a fatal flaw that she'd identified within hours of gaining access to the development files. Dr. Evans, the problem is worse than we initially thought. Evans settled into a chair across from Alexandra's desk. Explain. Alexandra turned her laptop screen so both women could see the software analysis. The Raptor X backup systems were designed to take control during primary system failures, but the trigger conditions for backup activation include normal flight parameters that the software interprets as emergencies. In plain English, the aircraft thinks it's crashing when it's actually flying perfectly, so it rescues itself by taking control away from the pilot and attempting emergency procedures. Evans studied the screen, her expression growing more concerned as she absorbed the implications. How many flights have experienced this problem? Alexandra consulted her analysis files. Based on flight data logs, approximately 45% of Raptor X operations have included brief periods of system conflict. Most pilots never noticed because the conflicts resolved quickly. But some didn't resolve quickly. Major Thompson's crash, Lieutenant Walker's emergency landing, and at least 3 other incidents that were classified as pilot error or minor technical malfunctions. Evans was quiet for several minutes, processing the scope of the problem. Commander, this analysis suggests that the Raptor X program has been systematically covering up design flaws for months. Not covering up, Alexandra corrected. Misunderstanding. The engineers didn't recognize the pattern because they were analyzing individual incidents rather than comprehensive flight data. But you recognize the pattern. Alexandra felt the conversation approaching dangerous territory again. Her ability to identify the Raptor X's problems stemmed from intimate knowledge of flight systems that her current position shouldn't have provided. I had access to assessment data across multiple aircraft, she said carefully. Pattern recognition becomes clearer with comprehensive data sets. Evans leaned forward. Commander, we need to discuss your technical background. This level of systems analysis requires expertise that goes beyond assessment training. Alexandra's stomach tightened. The question she'd been dreading for 3 days was finally being asked directly by someone who had authority to demand answers. Ma'am, I studied technical manuals extensively. I ask questions. I pay attention to details. You've also identified software conflicts that Raptor X program engineers missed. You've predicted system failures with mathematical precision, and you've recommended design modifications that require understanding of flight dynamics at a level typically associated with test pilot training. The statement hung between them like an accusation. Evans had been conducting her own investigation, trying to understand how an assessment officer had developed capabilities that exceeded those of certified engineers. Dr. Evans, are you questioning my analysis or my authority to provide it? I'm questioning how you acquired the expertise to conduct this analysis. Alexandra stood and moved to the window overlooking the flight line, where Raptor X aircraft sat in hangars while engineers worked to implement her safety recommendations. Telling the truth would vindicate her technical knowledge but force examination of the investigation that had ended her flying career. Ma'am, my expertise comes from extensive study of aircraft systems and careful observation of performance patterns. Commander Reeves, Evans said quietly, I've reviewed your personnel file. Alexandra turned from the window, her pulse quickening. Evans' tone suggested she'd found information that wasn't supposed to be accessible to civilian investigators. Ma'am, your file shows assessment training and tactical evaluation certification, but it also shows gaps, periods where your assignment history isn't clearly documented. Alexandra felt the institutional walls closing around her again. Someone had been digging into classified records, trying to understand the contradiction between her current role and her technical capabilities. Dr. Evans, I'm not sure what you're implying. Evans opened her tablet and displayed a document that made Alexandra's breath catch. It was a fragment of her original Raptor X program assignment, a single page that had escaped the classification purge that followed her crash. This document suggests you were involved in Raptor X development before your reassignment to assessment duties. Alexandra stared at the evidence of her former life. The document was incomplete, missing context and classification markings, but it clearly showed her name associated with test pilot duties that officially had never existed. That document is out of context, she said carefully. Is it? Because this document suggests you were a Raptor X test pilot before your reassignment to assessment duties, which would explain your extraordinary technical knowledge and your ability to predict system failures. Alexandra sat down slowly, recognizing that her carefully maintained cover was crumbling. Evans had found enough evidence to piece together the truth, and continued denial would only damage her credibility. Dr. Evans, that information is classified. It was classified. Evans corrected. But the Raptor X program is in crisis, and we need to understand why our best technical analysis is coming from someone who's officially unqualified to provide it. Alexandra looked at the document fragment on Evans' tablet, seeing her former life reduced to a few lines of administrative text. The irony was bitter. She was being questioned about expertise that had once been celebrated, knowledge that had once made her one of the military's most trusted test pilots. Ma'am, what exactly are you asking me? I'm asking you to explain how an assessment officer developed test pilot-level understanding of Raptor X systems. And I'm asking because your knowledge is the only thing preventing more crashes. Alexandra weighed her options. Continued denial would protect the classification of her former role, but might undermine the investigation that was saving lives. Acknowledging her background would vindicate her expertise, but force examination of the circumstances that had ended her flying career. Dr. Evans, I was involved in Raptor X development. That involvement ended 3 years ago following an aircraft accident. The accident that resulted in your reassignment to assessment duties? Yes. Evans consulted her tablet again. Commander, we found references to an investigation that concluded with findings of pilot error, but we've also found technical reports that suggest mechanical failure was the primary cause. Alexandra felt the familiar weight of institutional betrayal settling over her shoulders. The investigation that had ended her career had been politically motivated, designed to protect the Raptor X program, rather than establish truth. The investigation findings are classified, ma'am. Commander Reeves, I have Pentagon authorization to review any documentation relevant to Raptor X program safety. That includes previous incident investigations. Alexandra realized that Evans wasn't just questioning her background. She was conducting a comprehensive review that would inevitably expose the cover-up that had destroyed her career. Ma'am, what exactly have you found? Evans turned her tablet so Alexandra could see the screen. It displayed technical analysis from Alexandra's original crash investigation, analysis that clearly identified targeting system failure as the primary cause of the accident. We found evidence that your accident was caused by mechanical failure, not pilot error. We've also found evidence that this mechanical failure was identical to the Raptor X problems you've been identifying. Alexandra stared at the documents that proved what she'd known for 3 years, that her crash had been caused by the same design flaws that were now systematically destroying Raptor X aircraft. Dr. Evans, why are you showing me this? Because the Raptor X program has been experiencing the same technical problems that caused your crash, and because the people who investigated your accident either didn't understand the technical evidence or deliberately ignored it. Alexandra felt 3 years of suppressed anger and frustration rising in her chest. The investigation that had ended her career had been a sham, designed to protect institutional interests rather than establish facts. Ma'am, what does this mean for the Raptor X program? It means that you've been right about everything, Evans said quietly. The technical problems, the design flaws, the systematic failures, all of it traces back to issues that should have been identified during your original investigation. Alexandra processed this information, understanding that vindication was finally within reach. But vindication would come at the cost of exposing institutional negligence that extended far beyond her personal situation. Dr. Evans, if you're correct, then the Raptor X program has been operating with known safety defects for 3 years. That's exactly what I'm saying. A knock on the office door interrupted their conversation. Colonel Harrison entered, followed by Captain Bennett and 2 Pentagon officials Alexandra didn't recognize. Commander Reeves, Dr. Evans, Colonel Harrison said formally. We need to discuss the scope of the Raptor X investigation. One of the Pentagon officials, a woman with gray hair and the bearing of senior civilian authority, stepped forward. Commander Reeves, I'm Director Elizabeth Sinclair from the Defense Safety Oversight Office. We've been reviewing your technical analysis and the circumstances surrounding your reassignment to assessment duties. Alexandra stood at attention, recognizing that this conversation would determine her future in the military. Ma'am. Commander, we found significant discrepancies between the official findings of your accident investigation and the technical evidence that was available at the time. Captain Bennett spoke up from his position near the door. Ma'am, Commander Reeves's accident was thoroughly investigated. The findings were clear. Captain Bennett, Director Sinclair replied coolly, the findings were politically convenient. The technical evidence tells a different story. Alexandra watched Bennett's face flush with anger as he realized that his mentor's investigation was being challenged by Pentagon officials. Ma'am, are you questioning the integrity of the original investigation? I'm stating that the original investigation reached conclusions that weren't supported by technical evidence, and I'm stating that those flawed conclusions have contributed to ongoing safety problems with the Raptor X program. Colonel Harrison stepped forward. Director Sinclair, what exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing that Commander Reeves' flight status be immediately reinstated and that she be assigned as lead investigator for comprehensive Raptor X program safety review. Alexandra felt the room's atmosphere shift as the implications became clear. She was being offered not just vindication, but authority over the program that had destroyed her career. Ma'am, she said quietly, I'm honored by your confidence. Commander, this isn't about honor. This is about preventing more crashes by utilizing the expertise that should never have been sidelined. Bennett's voice was tight, with barely controlled anger. Ma'am, Commander Reeves has been out of flight status for 3 years. Reinstating her flight authorization would require extensive retraining and recertification. Director Sinclair consulted her tablet. Captain Bennett, Commander Reeves' technical analysis has prevented at least 3 crashes in the past week. Her expertise appears to be current and comprehensive. Alexandra looked around the room at faces that showed a mixture of vindication, resentment, and political calculation. She was being offered everything she'd wanted for 3 years. But accepting would force acknowledgement that the Raptor X program had been fundamentally flawed from its inception. Director Sinclair, she said carefully, what would my specific responsibilities include? Complete authority over Raptor X flight operations until all safety issues are resolved. Complete access to classified development data, and complete authority to recommend design modifications or program suspension. Alexandra understood that she was being offered more than career restoration. She was being given power to fundamentally reshape the program that had broken her. Ma'am, I accept. Within 48 hours of Director Sinclair's decision, Westwind Joint Air Base transformed from a routine military installation into the center of the largest aircraft safety investigation in decades. Alexandra Reeves found herself in the surreal position of commanding the same hangar where she'd spent 3 years as an assessment officer. now with authority that exceeded most base commanders. The Raptor X program was officially suspended pending comprehensive safety review. All aircraft were grounded until Alexandra's team could implement fixes for the design flaws she'd identified. The decision sent shockwaves through the Pentagon, the defense industry, and the careers of everyone who'd been involved in the original development program. Captain Lucas Bennett appeared in Alexandra's office at 1,400 hours, his face showing the strain of someone whose career prospects had collapsed overnight. His mentor, General Terrence Mitchell, who had overseen the flawed accident review that had destroyed Alexandra's career 3 years earlier, had been reassigned pending investigation. "You must be satisfied," Bennett said, settling into the chair across from Alexandra's desk without being invited. Alexandra looked up from technical specifications she was reviewing. "Captain Bennett, I'm satisfied that we're preventing crashes. I'm not satisfied about anything else." "General Mitchell's career is over. The Raptor X program is suspended indefinitely. Half the engineering staff has been reassigned. All because of your technical analysis. All because the Raptor X program had fundamental safety problems that weren't addressed when they should have been." Bennett leaned forward, his voice tight with anger. "You know what I think? I think you've been planning this for 3 years. I think you've been waiting for the chance to destroy everyone who was involved in your investigation." Alexandra set down her files and studied Bennett's expression. He looked genuinely convinced that she'd orchestrated the Raptor X crisis to achieve personal revenge. "Captain, do you really believe I sabotaged multiple aircraft and risked pilots' lives just to vindicate my career? I believe you saw an opportunity and took it." Alexandra stood and moved to the window overlooking the flight line, where Raptor X aircraft sat in enforced idleness while engineers worked to implement safety modifications. "Lucas," she said, using his first name deliberately, 3 years ago, General Mitchell's investigation concluded that I caused a crash due to pilot error. That conclusion was technically inaccurate and professionally devastating. The investigation was thorough and fair." Alexandra turned from the window. "The investigation lasted 72 minutes. The technical evidence was ignored, and the real cause of the crash, the same design flaw that's been killing Raptor X pilots, was buried in classified files." Bennett's confidence wavered slightly. "That's not how it happened. That's exactly how it happened. And if you'd actually reviewed the technical evidence instead of accepting Mitchell's conclusions, you'd know that." Alexandra moved to her laptop and pulled up the crash investigation files that Director Sinclair had declassified. The technical data was comprehensive and damning. Clear evidence of targeting system failure that had been dismissed as irrelevant to the official findings. "Look at this," she said, turning the screen toward Bennett. "Targeting pressure logs, system performance data, failure sequence analysis. All evidence that my crash was caused by mechanical failure identical to what we're seeing with Raptor X aircraft today." Bennett studied the data reluctantly, his expression showing growing uncertainty. The technical evidence was overwhelming and impossible to dismiss. "If this is accurate," he said slowly, "then the investigation was wrong," Alexandra completed. "Deliberately or incompetently wrong, but wrong either way." Bennett was quiet for several minutes, processing implications that extended beyond his personal situation. If Alexandra's crash had been caused by design flaws rather than pilot error, then the Raptor X program had been operating with known safety defects for 3 years. "Why didn't you fight the investigation findings?" he asked finally. Alexandra returned to her chair, remembering the isolation and institutional pressure that had followed her crash. "I tried. I provided technical analysis identical to what you're looking at now. I requested additional investigation. I documented every system failure that contributed to the crash. What happened? I was told that challenging the investigation findings would be considered insubordination. I was told that accepting the results and maintaining program security was my duty as an officer." Bennett absorbed this information, understanding for the first time the institutional forces that had destroyed Alexandra's career. "So you accepted reassignment to assessment duties." "I accepted reassignment because the alternative was court-martial for insubordination and breach of classified program security." Bennett leaned back in his chair, his anger replaced by something approaching comprehension. "And you've been watching Raptor X operations for 3 years, knowing that the same problems that caused your crash were still present. I've been documenting pattern failures and trying to prevent crashes through assessment reports that no one took seriously until now, until pilots started dying. Bennett was quiet again, processing the scope of institutional failure that had endangered Raptor X operations for 3 years. General Mitchell's investigation hadn't just been wrong. It had actively prevented identification of safety problems that were now requiring program suspension. "Alexandra," he said finally, "what happens now?" Alexandra consulted her project timeline, noting the months of additional testing and modification work that would be required to make Raptor X aircraft genuinely safe for operations. "Now, we fix the problems that should have been addressed 3 years ago. We implement design modifications that will prevent the system failures I've been documenting. And we establish safety protocols that prevent technical evidence from being ignored for political convenience. How long will that take? 6 months minimum, possibly longer if we discover additional problems during comprehensive testing." Bennett processed this timeline, understanding that his certification as a Raptor X instructor pilot would be delayed indefinitely. His career advancement, which had depended on completing Raptor X training, was now contingent on Alexandra's success in resolving the crisis. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. Alexandra looked up from her files. "Captain? I've been treating you like an enemy for 3 years. I've been assuming that your technical knowledge was somehow illegitimate, that your insights were motivated by personal grievance rather than professional expertise." "You were protecting your career interests," Alexandra said. "That's understandable under the circumstances." "No, it isn't. I was protecting my assumptions about what had happened to you. I never actually reviewed the technical evidence. I just accepted the official story because it was convenient." Alexandra nodded, recognizing the courage it took for Bennett to acknowledge his misconceptions. "Lucas, you weren't the only person who made assumptions. The entire institutional structure supported those assumptions. But I was the one who questioned your expertise every time you tried to prevent crashes, and now you understand why I had that expertise." Bennett stood to leave, then hesitated at the door. "Alexandra, is there anything I can do to help with the investigation?" Alexandra considered the offer, recognizing an opportunity to transform an adversary into an ally. "Actually, yes. I need someone with current Raptor X flight experience to help evaluate the safety modifications we're implementing. You want me to work with you? I want you to help make sure Raptor X aircraft are safe before any pilot flies them again." Bennett nodded slowly. "I'd be honored to contribute to that effort." As Bennett left her office, Alexandra returned to the technical specifications that would determine the Raptor X program's future. The investigation was revealing systematic problems that would require months to resolve. But for the first time in 3 years, she had authority to ensure that political convenience wouldn't override technical reality. Master Sergeant Ramirez knocked on her door at 1,700 hours, carrying coffee and the satisfied expression of someone whose instincts had been vindicated. "Commander," she said, settling into the chair Bennett had vacated, "I've been watching this base for 22 years, and I've never seen anything like what's happened this week." "What do you mean, Olivia?" "I mean, you've gone from assessment officer to program director in 4 days. That's either the fastest career advancement in military history or the most dramatic vindication I've ever witnessed." Alexandra smiled grimly. "Probably both." "What's next?" Alexandra looked at the project timeline that would consume the next 6 months of her life. "Next, we prove that good engineering can overcome bad politics. We fix the Raptor X program properly, and we make sure this kind of institutional failure doesn't happen again." Ramirez nodded approvingly. "Commander, there's something I've been wanting to tell you for 3 years." "What's that?" "I always knew you'd be back in the cockpit eventually. Talent like yours doesn't stay hidden forever." Alexandra felt a surge of gratitude for the steady support that had sustained her through 3 years of professional exile. "Olivia, I couldn't have survived this without friends like you." "You didn't just survive, Commander. You prevailed. And every pilot on this base is going to fly safer aircraft because of your expertise." As Ramirez left her office, Alexandra returned to the technical work that would define the next phase of her career. The Raptor X investigation was more than professional vindication. It was an opportunity to ensure that institutional politics would never again override technical reality when pilots' lives were at stake. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, as her team began implementing the design modifications that would make Raptor X aircraft genuinely safe for operations. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, Alexandra Reeves was exactly where she belonged. Using her expertise to protect the pilots who trusted their lives to the aircraft she understood better than anyone else in the world. The morning briefing room at Westwind Joint Air Base hummed with tension as Alexandra Reeves presented her comprehensive analysis of the Raptor X system flaws. 4 weeks into the investigation, her team had uncovered problems far more extensive than anyone had anticipated. The audience included senior Pentagon officials, program engineers, and test pilots who would be responsible for implementing her recommendations. The fundamental issue, Alexandra said, indicating the complex diagram on the main screen, is that the Raptor X targeting system was designed to operate independently from flight controls, but in practice they interact in ways the original engineers never anticipated. Captain Winters, who had initially questioned Alexandra's expertise but now served as her deputy, advanced the presentation to the next slide. We've identified 3 critical failure points where system interactions create catastrophic conflicts. Dr. Evans added, these conflicts occur only under specific operational conditions, combinations of altitude, speed, and targeting sequence that weren't replicated during controlled testing. Captain Bennett, who had become one of Alexandra's strongest allies, addressed the pilots in the audience. In simple terms, the aircraft is fighting itself. Primary and backup systems engage in electronic warfare that the pilot can't detect until it's too late. Director Sinclair, who had flown in from Washington to assess the investigation's progress, studied the technical data with growing concern. Commander Reeves, your analysis indicates these problems have been present since initial deployment. Yes, ma'am. The design architecture contains fundamental integration flaws that couldn't be addressed through software patches or minor hardware modifications. The implications hung in the air. The Raptor X program would require complete redesign of its core systems, a process that would cost billions of dollars and delay deployment by at least 18 months. Colonel Harrison, whose career now depended on successfully navigating this crisis, looked grim. Commander, what are your specific recommendations? Alexandra moved to the final section of her presentation. We need to implement 3 major modifications. First, redesign the targeting system architecture to prevent conflict with flight controls. Second, develop new integration protocols that maintain proper system hierarchy during emergency procedures. Third, install comprehensive monitoring systems that alert pilots to potential conflicts before they become critical. Timeline? Director Sinclair asked. 9 months for design, implementation, and testing. 12 months for full fleet deployment. The room fell silent as the military and civilian leadership processed these recommendations. The financial and strategic implications were enormous, but the alternative, continuing to risk pilot lives with fundamentally flawed aircraft, was unacceptable. Director Sinclair stood. Commander Reeves, your recommendations are approved. Effective immediately, you have authorization to implement all necessary modifications to the Raptor X program, regardless of budget implications or deployment delays. Alexandra felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She was being trusted not just to identify problems, but to solve them, to rebuild a program that had been compromised by political convenience and institutional arrogance. Thank you, ma'am. We'll begin implementation immediately. As the briefing concluded, Alexandra found herself surrounded by the pilots who would be testing her modifications. Men and women whose lives would depend on her getting this right. Lieutenant Sarah Walker, whose brother had nearly died in one of the Raptor X incidents, approached with gratitude written across her face. Commander, I just wanted to say thank you. My brother would have been the next casualty if you hadn't identified these problems. Alexandra nodded, understanding the human stakes behind the technical challenges. Lieutenant, this is about more than fixing aircraft. It's about changing how we approach safety throughout the program. What do you mean? I mean, creating systems where technical concerns can't be dismissed for political convenience, where expertise is valued regardless of who provides it. Walker nodded thoughtfully. You're changing the culture, not just the aircraft. That's exactly right. Because the best engineering in the world won't save lives if institutional arrogance prevents us from acknowledging problems. As the pilots dispersed to their assignments, Captain Bennett remained behind, studying the technical diagrams with newfound respect. Alexandra, I've been thinking about what happened to you 3 years ago. Lucas, we've moved beyond that. No. This is important. When your crash was investigated, the technical evidence was available. The system failures were documented, but the institutional pressure to protect the program was stronger than the commitment to technical truth. Alexandra considered this assessment. That's a concise summary of what happened. And it could happen again to someone else unless we change the system that allows political convenience to override engineering reality. Alexandra realized that Bennett wasn't just offering support, he was proposing a more fundamental transformation than even she had envisioned. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that while you're rebuilding the Raptor X, we should also rebuild the safety protocols that govern how investigations are conducted. Create institutional safeguards that prevent technical evidence from being suppressed, regardless of political implications. Alexandra felt a surge of purpose that extended beyond her personal vindication. Bennett was right. Fixing the aircraft would save lives today, but fixing the institutional culture would save lives for generations. Lucas, I think you've just identified the most important part of this entire investigation. Over the next 6 months, Alexandra led the most comprehensive aircraft redesign in military aviation history. The Raptor X targeting system was completely rebuilt, with integration protocols that prevented the conflicts she'd identified. But more importantly, she and Bennett developed new safety oversight procedures that fundamentally changed how technical expertise was evaluated during investigations. The Reeves Protocol, as it came to be known throughout the military aviation community, established 3 core principles. Technical evidence always supersedes administrative convenience, expertise is evaluated based on accuracy rather than position, and safety concerns can be raised by any personnel without fear of career repercussions. On a clear Arizona morning, Alexandra Reeves climbed into the cockpit of the redesigned Raptor X for its first comprehensive flight test. After 6 months of intensive work, the aircraft had been transformed from a deadly hazard into what engineers were already calling the safest advanced fighter ever developed. Captain Bennett's voice came through her headset from the chase plane position. Raptor X Alpha, this is Chase 1. All systems showing green for test sequence. Alexandra felt the familiar surge of adrenaline as she prepared to take the aircraft through maneuvers that would have caused catastrophic failure in its original configuration. Chase 1, this is Raptor X Alpha. Beginning test sequence at your mark. For the next 90 minutes, Alexandra subjected the Raptor X to the most demanding operational conditions ever attempted with an experimental fighter. She executed targeting sequences while performing high-G turns that would have triggered system conflicts in the original design. She pushed the aircraft to maximum velocity while simultaneously engaging multiple simulated targets, conditions that had preceded Thompson's fatal crash. Throughout the test, the Raptor X performed flawlessly. The targeting systems maintained perfect integration with flight controls. The backup systems remained properly subordinated until genuine emergencies required their activation. The monitoring systems provided clear alerts whenever operational parameters approached critical thresholds. Control, this is Raptor X Alpha completing final test sequence. All systems nominal, all performance parameters exceeded. Director Sinclair's voice responded from the command center. Raptor X Alpha, return for landing. Outstanding work, Commander. As Alexandra brought the Raptor X in for final approach, she felt the satisfaction of someone whose technical expertise had been vindicated in the most dramatic way possible. The aircraft that touched down at Westwind Joint Air Base was proof that institutional failure could be overcome by persistent dedication to technical excellence. The hangar erupted in applause as Alexandra shut down the engines and opened the cockpit canopy. Director Sinclair, Colonel Harrison, Captain Bennett, and dozens of engineers, technicians, and pilots who'd contributed to the Raptor X redesign surrounded the aircraft with expressions of relief and triumph. Commander Reeves, Director Sinclair said as Alexandra climbed down from the cockpit, you've just completed the most successful test flight in Raptor X program history. Alexandra removed her helmet and looked at the assembled team that had transformed a fundamentally flawed aircraft into a masterpiece of military engineering. Ma'am, this success belongs to everyone who contributed to the redesign effort. I just had the privilege of proving that their work was successful. Captain Bennett approached with the smile of someone whose misconceptions had been replaced by genuine respect. Alexandra, that was flying that exceeded every parameter we established for Raptor X operations. Lucas, that was an aircraft performing exactly as it was designed to perform, safely, predictably, and within specifications that prioritize pilot survival over institutional convenience. Colonel Harrison joined the group surrounding Alexandra, his expression showing relief that extended beyond professional satisfaction. Commander Reeves, I'm authorizing immediate reinstatement of full Raptor X operations. The program is no longer suspended. Alexandra nodded, understanding that her work had achieved more than personal vindication. The Raptor X program would continue with aircraft that were genuinely safe for operational use. Master Sergeant Ramirez appeared at her elbow, grinning with the satisfaction of someone whose faith had been rewarded. "Commander, I've got a question for you." "What's that, Olivia?" "Now that you've rebuilt the Raptor X program and proven that politics can't override good engineering, what are you going to do for an encore?" Alexandra considered the question, looking around at the base that had been transformed by 6 months of systematic dedication to technical excellence over institutional convenience. "Olivia, I'm going to keep flying. I'm going to keep ensuring that pilot safety takes priority over bureaucratic comfort. And I'm going to make sure that no pilot ever again gets blamed for crashes caused by design flaws that politicians want to ignore." Ramirez nodded approvingly. "Commander, that sounds like a mission worth dedicating a career to." As the celebration continued around the Raptor X that had proven the success of her technical vision, Alexandra Reeves understood that she'd achieved something more valuable than career restoration. She'd proven that expertise and persistence could overcome institutional failure, that technical truth could prevail over political convenience, and that the best people never really lose their abilities. They just wait for opportunities to prove them again. The Raptor X program that emerged from her investigation would serve as a model for how military development should prioritize safety over schedule, engineering over politics, and pilot welfare over bureaucratic convenience. And Alexandra Reeves would continue flying, ensuring that the sky belonged to those who understood that true excellence could never be permanently hidden by administrative decisions or institutional politics. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.